coming back to school with me. We could have done it all so easily.
Hi, my name is Craig Thompson Wood. I'm the board game teacher. Thanks for coming to the classroom. Back again today to talk about Dragon Rampant. Now, I want to apologize up front first off, because if you'd seen my previous video where I talked about this this application as an educational tool, I was calling it Dragons Rampant. Like the dragons are rampant, they're running around crazy, uncontrolled. That's not the case. It's Dragon Rampant, without the apostrophe S, which is a reference to heraldry. So in heraldry, the facing of the animal with its positions of its forelegs and tail, etc., it would mean certain things. So then the Dragon Rampant would then be a reference to this heraldic device. So my apologies for that, but moving forward, what I want to talk about today was how to build an army. Because when I first got into this game and started exploring it, I found that there were some things I was looking for some rules explanations online. There was people who were doing rules explanations, but they were kind of going through a lot of different things all at once. I want to focus. So for anybody who's new to the game, who perhaps wants to learn about how it works, and if you want to create your own army, what would that look like? How would you do that? This is the video that you can watch, because this is what I want to do now. So I'm going to go through the steps of this, and hopefully by the end then you'll have a very solid sense of how to build your own army for Dragon Rampant. So the first thing to know for Dragon Rampant and building your army is that most games, a standard game is going to be 24 points, which isn't a lot, but you'll see that each unit has very small points costs. So 24 is your standard. There's of course always opportunity for you to go higher or lower than that, but 24 is the standard. But depending on your collection, whether you have a small or large collection, you can of course go bigger if you and your opponent both agree. Other important considerations for when you're playing, that the minimum number of units that you can have in your army is going to be 4 units for your force. So that's something important to consider when you're creating. So even in a reduced game, you're going to need to at least have 4 units. And with a larger game, I wouldn't imagine that would be so much of a problem. But just that's one important consideration. Also, as you're building your units, that the minimum points cost for a unit can be 1. So there's no way of, there's ways to reduce unit costs, but you can't do it in such that you are going to then make the unit cost 0. So 1 is the minimum point cost, and 10 is the greatest point cost. You cannot go beyond 10 points for a single unit in Dragon Rampant. Now, before I go into the different types of units that are available in Dragon Rampant, I want to talk about the unit profiles, which will then help to understand how the different units work and why some unit types are better than others in different ways. So let's just quickly dive into that. So in the unit profile, you're going to see a lot of different characteristics listed there, and they're going to have numbers after them. In some cases, they'll have a plus after them. So for the for giving orders to your units, you have an attack order, a move order, and a shoot order. So for attack, move, and shoot, it's going to have a number, usually a fairly low number. I think as high as 7 would be the highest you'd get, with a plus afterwards. That means that is what you're going to need to roll on 2d6, 2 6-sided dice, and score that number or higher in order to successfully have the unit complete that action. So if you wanted the unit to attack and they had a 4+, you'd roll 2 dice, and as long as the 2 dice add to 4 or greater, then the unit has successfully carried out that order. The next are your values. So you have an attack value, a defense value, and a shoot value. These are the numbers that the units need to achieve with a roll in order to successfully cause damage to a unit that they are attacking. So an attack value is for the offensive unit. So if my unit charges my opponent's unit, then my units will be using their attack value, while my opponent's units will be using their defense value to fight back. In some cases, some units with spears and such may be better on the defense than they are on the offense, because they can use those weapons better in an advantage when they are being attacked rather than when they are initiating the attack. So in an attack value, so the attack value is say 5+, then the unit is going to roll a number of dice, and for every 5 or 6 they roll, that will be 1 hit against the enemy unit. for every, so say the enemy unit has a 4+ on their defense value, so then they're rolling to attack me back, and for every 4, 5, or 6 they roll will be a successful hit against my unit. But now successful hits do not necessarily mean deaths, and that's where the armor value comes in. So in armor, if the armor is, say, 2, then it's going to take 2 successful hits to cause 1 strength point of damage to my unit. So if the armor is 4, you need 4 hits. So you can see how armor is important. There's none in Warhammer and some other games. You have a roll to hit, maybe a roll to wound, and then the enemy will get a roll to make an armor save. In this case, there's none of that. It's all streamlined into 1 dice roll. So I roll all my dice, and for every number that's achieved, that's that many hits. So if I need a 5+ and I roll 3 of them, and my enemy has an armor of 2, then it takes 2 to cause 1 hit, so I cause 1 wound against that unit, and the 3rd hit I had is wasted because I need 2, and that's just that simple. I'll go more into this when I do the rules explanations. Right now, I'm just going to focus more on the units. Every unit also has a maximum movement characteristic, and this is how many inches they can move on the battlefield when they make a successful move action. They also have a courage. Now, anytime a unit takes any damage, or there's different circumstances and situations where they may have to make a courage test, in that case, then this is the number you have to roll on 2 dice and roll equal to or above that number. There will be modifiers to this occasionally, and I'll explain those more when I do the rules explanation video. And finally, there's the points cost. Every unit is going to have a points cost telling you how many points is the base cost of the unit. There's ways to augment the cost by making them a little weaker, by reducing the effectiveness of maybe their missile weapons, or maybe make them stronger by making them give them the offensive characteristic, or giving them missile weapons where they didn't have them before. So there's ways that this number may fluctuate, but that's the base cost for the unit. Okay, quick word about the different types of units. So for different types of units, you have mounted, you have war beasts, you have foot troops, you have missile troops, and you have ravenous hordes. I'm going to take a brief moment to talk about the breakdowns for each of these different unit types. So for mounted units, you have elite mounted units, heavy mounted units, and light mounted units. So the elite riders are the best armored, and have the best weapons. They are your strongest troops. They typically do better on attacks than they do on the defense, which was represented by the fact that as they're charging in, they have the momentum, and you can use that to create and cause more damage than if they are on the receiving end of the charge. Heavy mounted troops are strong mounted troops, but not as well armored or not as well weaponed as the elites. And then the light mounted troops are more your skirmishing type. They do the hit and run attacks, and they're not in for the prolonged fight, but rather just to sort of harry the flanks of the foe and to avoid the close combat probably as much as possible, rely more on their missile weapons to do damage and to stay clear of the main fight. The next type of unit is war beasts, and war beasts come in 2 types. You have your greater war beast and your lesser war beast. So a greater war beast could be something huge, like a dragon, a large demon, or even a giant war elephant, say. So those would be an example of a greater war beast, whereas a lesser war beast would be maybe like a pack of dogs, wolves, something of that nature. So for the foot troops, you also have the elite, the heavy, the light, but you also have a troop type called the bellicose. And the bellicose is what I had to look up. It just means that you're rowdy, wild, you love fighting. And so with the elites, it's like the mounted troops, where you have the best weapons, you're the strongest attackers, and you have the best armor. But you also have less strength points than the other units, which I'll talk a little bit about more later. The heavy troops are your strong troops, good armor, good weapons. Light are very much your rank and file type of unit, not very strong. They are better. They're sort of your typical spearmen and such, and they're going to be the ones who are better receiving the attacks, holding the line, rather than being the ones to initiate the charges. It doesn't mean that they won't. It just means that they're not as good as when they are being charged. And then finally, your bellicose are your, as I say, your wild troops, and they are impulsive, want to attack, lightly armored, but strong troops for fighting. Then for your missile troops you don't have an elite, maybe because missile troops are typically not heavily armored. But for missile troops, you have your heavy troops, you have your light troops, then you have your skirmishing troops. So heavy troops would be your examples of things like crossbows, heavy weapons like that. Your light missile weapon troops would be things with bows, and then your skirmishers would be a unit of maybe scouts. And finally, the last category of unit type is the ravenous hordes. Ravenous hordes are your rabble, your things which are not well trained, they're not well disciplined, they're not good at anything really except just being a roadblock. These would be things like if you conscripted a group of peasants into an army, or if you had zombies. Those would be a good example of ravenous horde. Well, speaking of ravenous, we have a ravenous cat here who wants to be fed. So that pretty much covers then the different types of units that you have. And I know with me, I was thinking at first, okay, well, where's my trolls? Where's my goblins? Where's my different types of units? How do I know who is what? Well, that's the beauty of it, is that what you're going to do is you're going to take these unit types as an archetype, as a starting point, and use that then as your template to then build your unit onto it. So if you wanted a unit of trolls, you would decide then, well, they are foot troops. Okay, they're not carrying any missile, or maybe they are carrying missile weapons. Maybe they're carrying large boulders, which can be used as missile weapons. In which case, then you can use them maybe as heavy weapon missile troops or heavy missile troops. If they don't have missile weapons, they're just maybe clubs and such, then you decide you have those different types of foot troops. So you have the elites, heavy, light, bellicose. You decide which one do you think fits them best for your army. Are they wild trolls, so you want them to be bellicose, or are they very well disciplined trolls and then therefore maybe the elites, or maybe something in between? Maybe they could be heavy troops because the armor would represent their natural toughness, and the good armor attacks and things would represent the fact that they are a stronger troop. All up to you. The other thing you can do with these then, is when you look at the strength points of every unit is going to have a strength point of either 6 or 12. 6 or 12, and every unit is going to be that way. So any of the mounted units, I believe, hopefully I'm not mistaken here, but are 6 points each. The foot troops tend to be 12, but I know what, like say with the elite foot, they are 6. So there's going to be those points differences. So if you say take a unit of trolls and you say they are heavy foot troops. Now, one way to do it, the easiest way to do it, is to say that if you have 12 strength points in that unit, that every model is 1 strength point. So if I had a unit of, say, armored orcs, and the armored orcs, then I say they're heavy foot troops, and I have 12 of them. So therefore, when I take a wound, I remove 1 orc off the unit. Easy. Well, what I can also do to represent that some monsters are tougher than other monsters, I can take that same unit, say it's a heavy foot unit, but instead of 12 armored orcs, I have 3 trolls. Therefore, each troll then has 4 strength points, which adds up to the total of the unit. So that is one way to look at that. So what that's called is a reduced unit number. So where the number of troops shown in the unit is less than the strength points they have, it's just reduced. And sometimes it can even be a single. So if you have a particularly powerful character, then they can be represented by 1 unit. So then the range of what you can do with these things is really endless, because you're just going to be thinking about what kinds of things you want these troops to have. So if you wanted, say, a unit of wizards' apprentices all sort of gather together they're not quite powerful enough to be fighting on their own, but they gather together as these mage apprentices to go out and fight the other armies, then you could have them, say, as a light missile troop, because the missiles that they are firing are actually not bows and arrows, but spells. They're firing off spells at the enemy, and that's counted as that kind of troop. Or as I said, maybe trolls have missile weapons. In one army I played, I had a giant demon of Nurgle, which is also disease and filth and such, and so he was as my leader, he was just a missile troop all on his own. He was a heavy weapons troop, and the missiles he was firing was his great gobs of vomit. So it's all up to you then to how do you imagine it and rationalize the troop choice you've taken for the particular unit. So what you can do with the units as well then in Dragon Rampant, like I said, there's other ones like Lion Rampant. I'm not sure if there's other ones. I know Lion Rampant exists, which is not more historical. It is the historicals. Dragon Rampant then takes it and adds fantasy to it. And one way they do that is with your troops, then you can add fantastical elements to it. And there is a section for fantastical rules where you can make the creatures fearsome. So if you're fighting a large horde of zombies, then maybe they're fearsome. People are afraid to fight them. Or especially if you're fighting, let's say, a large dragon, it's going to have that extra element of fear as you're fighting it. You're going to be afraid to fight it because it's so scary. Maybe venomous. Now, venomous is sort of a catch-all term, so maybe it is actually venom, or maybe it is the sheer strength of the monster. But what venomous does is for every time when you're rolling to an attack, or defend, whenever you're rolling attack dice, then it's every 6 is 2 hits instead of 1. Just so again, is it the venom or is it just sheer strength that's causing that? Again, how you interpret it. So there's all these different things in the fantastical elements that fantastical rules that allow you to tailor and custom the units to suit your fantasy army better. And then the final thing I want to talk about is your leader. In your army, you're going to have one leader. So now, if you say I mentioned before that unit of, like, say, heavily armored orcs. Great, so you have a unit of heavily armored orcs, and each one is worth 1 strength point. Great, works well. Maybe within that unit, maybe they all look very similar, your rank and file orcs, or maybe there's one particularly big one in the middle. So you have 11 regular orcs and then 1 big orc. Well, that's your boss right there. Just you have to indicate who is your leader. Your army has to have one leader on the board, and usually it's better if the leader is clearly represented by a model that is different than the others. Now, the unit, as I say, could be part of the rank and file, or the unit can be a reduced unit things. So as if you had, like, say, a unit of Lightfoot troops, but you had, like, say, a goblin boss with a small bodyguard, that could be a light troop, so all 12 points are into him and his troops. You could have one on their own. So whether it's a very powerful wizard so the extra strength points are all the wards and things that the wizard has around to protect for protection, or maybe it's like something like, as I said, a large demon, so that all 12 strength points are attributed to its just sheer size. But you have to have a leader, and when you have the leader, one thing you're going to do for it as well is there's a fun little chart where, like old school D&D, you roll 3d6 and you consult the chart on that to find out what attribute your leader has, and that's going to be something that's going to have some effect in the game. So with all those rules now, you should have a fairly solid idea of how to create your own army for Dragon Rampant. Just, you are looking at what type of army you want, look at the model. I think start to look at the models that you have and work from there. What types of models would you like to see in there, and then think about what types of abilities do they have? How does this translate into the game? Would they be Lightfoot troops? Would they be Heavyfoot troops? Would they be Elitefoot troops? It's all going to depend on what you have and how you want them to be represented on the field. Then again, you can look at the different fantastical elements and things to make your troops more fine-tuned and more fantastic. But you also have to remember, don't get too carried away with adding all these fun things to the troops, making them powerful and giving them these things, because you have to have a minimum of 4 units on the field. I found that a little bit tricky myself when I was creating armies, is I was wanting to, this looks fun, I'll add this, I'll add this, I'll add this, and then I had to start scaling back just to make sure that I had enough that I could have my minimum number of units on the field. So let me just take a quick moment to share with you a couple examples here of what a force might look like. So here's an example of one of the armies I've been trying out. So I had here a giant. He was a bellicose foot troop, and he was 8 points towards my army. So those are the special rules that he had for him. Some were, like wild charge, ranger, fleet-footed, were all countercharge. Were all part of being a bellicose foot troop. But I did add fear to him because I figured that made sense with those being so large. Then I had 3 units of goblins here, and the goblins were 2 points each. They were light foot troops. They were fearful, which was a -1 to their cost because it makes harder for their courage tests. And then they gave them some short range weapons, which then added back to their cost, put them back to 2. And then Scarsnake was my leader, and he was a heavy foot troop, so he was 6 points. I gave him offensive, which makes it easy for him to attack. So it's a bonus add-on to the offensive, to the heavy foot troop. And trolls were also heavy foot. So they were a reduced unit, obviously, as was Scarsnake, so each troll was 4 points. It's 4 strength points, and Scarsnake, they were each 6 strength points. And these are the other troops I've been playing around with, so these are my beasts of Nurgle I had. So they were bellicose foot. They were 7 points because they also had venomous added on to them, because I figure they are pretty venomous and disgusting. The Great Unclean One, he was a heavy missile. As I said, his range was his vomit. So the vomit had he's a reduced unit cost, but it was a weighty projectile, which reduced the cost of him a little bit because of the fact that we want the vomit to be shooting like 18 inches across the board. Also given venomous and fear, so I figured it was appropriate. And then the last were the Plague Bears. The Plague Bears were light foot troops, and they were reduced units, so every one was 2 wounds. And so that was it. So each of the units was 3 points. So that was my 24 points of Nurgle. I also just want to say a note about these reference cards which I made up. And if you, in the back of the Dragon Rampant book, there is a sheet which can be photocopied, or if you have the PDF version, you can print it. But if you don't have that, or don't want to do that, I would highly, highly recommend making these little reference cards to play with, so that way it saves you a lot of time and trouble and headache while playing the game, so you don't have to keep going back and referencing all the different stats and rules for them. I mean, I didn't write down the rules for what leader means or reduced units or any of those things, but you can know what those mean. That'll just jog your memory that they have those things available. So do make reference cards. Well, that's going to wrap it up for today's episode. If you have any questions about Dragon Rampant, about anything to do with the army creation, then please leave me a message in the comment section below. Or if you have any other ideas for games you think might be good on the channel, or ideas for topics you'd like me to talk about, please leave me a message in the comment section below. But until next time, I'm Craig Thompson with the Board Game Teacher saying thanks for coming to the classroom.
Are you coming back to school with me?